listening to The Kula Ring, a podcast made for manufacturing marketers. Here are Carmen Perry and Jeff White.
Welcome. Welcome to The Kula Ring, a podcast for manufacturing marketers brought to you by Kula Partners. My name is Jeff White. Joining me today is Carmen Perry. Carmen, how are you doing, sir?
All is well. All is well. I'm going to lobby our producer, though, to keep that little blip in when you started the "Welcome to the Kula Ring" bit, because you deliver it so consistently that I would guess our listeners think it's pre-recorded. But guys, you need to know that this is new every time.
Yep, I'm that consistent.
Yeah. So
280 odd episodes in, I deliver that in my sleep.
if there's one thing that you know about this show is that if I have a chance to throw Jeff under the bus a little bit for a glitch that's completely unrelated to the show and its entirety, that I will do that.
That's fair. I mean, this is what we get for working together for 15 odd years. So it's like,
All right. Well, look, that's not what we're here to talk about.
not at all. I think what we're here to really talk about is just sort of the agility that's often required within startup manufacturing organizations. What a marketer has to be able to do in order to continue to move the organization forward, and kind of the you know um, I don't think anybody would disagree that there's a bit of gymnastics in there, that it's a particularly interesting way to move. And our next guest, I think, has some unique experience.
Yeah, and it's a different environment than we are often talking to, because when you're talking to established industrial players, established manufacturers, it's the challenges that are at play are just frankly different, and so it's nice to have a more manufacturing startup on the show.
Yeah, for sure. So joining us today is Jillian Childs. Jillian is the VP of Marketing at Turntide Technologies. Welcome to the Kula Ring, Jillian.
Thank you. I'm very, very excited to be here.
It's great to have you on the show.
Jillian, we're excited to have you on the show, and I guess let's excuse me. First things first.
I just like to,
You're gonna throw me under the bus. I
Yeah, no,
always
that was your
cough
turn.
and hack. This comes from me, like trying to smoke and have espresso just before coming on the show to try to get to a deeper voice, but it never really works.
No, the CBC Radio 3 voice.
Exactly. That reference will be completely lost on everybody except Canadians, and Canadians of a certain vintage at that. But nevertheless, let's jump into it here. And Jillian, I'd love to learn more about Turntide Technologies, what it is you all are up to there, and how did you end up there?
Yeah, so I'm going to take a little step back, because I think part of my story starts very early in my career and then lands me at Turntide today. And I think part of that story is the luxury marketing that I started early on in my career, and worked for Sotheby's International, worked for PNC Wealth Management from a variety of industries. So had a different lens on marketing that most people do when they enter startups. And then from there, went through a couple other luxury brands before I landed at Tesla, and then really started my high growth experience in startup world. From there, I've been through a variety of different startups and a variety of different industries, but the one piece that has driven me back to each startup is the mission around sustainability and making the world, not to be cheesy, a better place, and trying to essentially electrify and become more sustainable in everything that we do. And Turntide's mission is to drive the electrification, drive the decarbonization of global industries worldwide. So in that front, I am leading all of the brand growth and press comms marketing efforts, so to speak, as a one-woman show right now, and handling a lot of different agency work. But I'm excited to talk about that, and I would say in terms of Turntide, I got here because of their mission and because it really felt true to what I wanted to be in terms of my career path, and on that sustainability front, how much that means to me, just from a personal standpoint and from a brand standpoint.
It's a really, admirable goal to sort of leverage your career and the organization you're working with for, moving towards more sustainable solutions and electrification solutions. And you've been there, I believe, 3 years. since you joined Turntide, and
Yes.
would you say your responsibilities have kind of shifted over that period in terms of who you're communicating with and what your goals are with external facing marketing?
Yeah, certainly. I started here developing our field marketing strategy and what our trade show would look like, what of our channel partner guidelines and channel program would look like, dealing with all of the sales team and the internal stakeholders there, upwards to how we're selling the brand to investors during our fundraising rounds and what that looks like in terms of getting brand awareness from a very high level from the fundraising community. I would say we're really honed in on what our focus is and our North Star now. So our North Star was always to provide the decarbonization of global industries through our technologies. But as we've gone through the iteration of the last few years, it's become very, very apparent that that North Star, through all of the changes within the organization, outside of the organization, and the ecosystem, we're really dialed into what that message looks like and how to grow significantly over the next few years.
I don't want to assume too much, but often, I guess one of the paths I've observed in this type of world is that often you're looking for kind of almost when you're a pre-investor or at the same time as looking at seeking investment rounds, you're looking for those types of early validation customers that can help prove the product. Maybe they're more likely to be early adopters in the space, et cetera. But then at some point, that there's a kind of a pivot that kind of a change afoot that says now we need to be a little bit more broad in our messaging, and maybe so is that basically not just shifting from investors to lead attraction, but is that also a dynamic to the change? Type of customer?
So that's a great question. Our core customers have remained the same throughout our life cycle. We have a variety of products on motors, power electronics, and energy storage solutions, and they serve a variety of industries. Some of those industries are construction, some of those industries are agriculture, some of those industries are commercial buildings, and we provide our component solutions into those applications. And we work with the engineering and manufacturing process throughout any customer base that we're targeting. I think what's become apparent over the last few years is that we're not going more broad, actually, that we're actually honing in on the specific market fit and the applications where we have found the most success. And so I think in general, startups always struggle with kind of figuring out their product market fit when they're beginning, and it's listening to the customers and understanding their needs, where combined with market research, where you really find that sweet spot in terms of being able to hone in your messaging, whether it's mission, vision statement, whether it's your positioning pillars, or whether it's your growth, social content, press comm strategy.
Is it that's really interesting to me, this notion of the brand's being positioned as a brand that helps save the planet, and those sustainability goals are very worthwhile, and I'm assuming all of the industries that you sell into have an interest in advancing their ESG goals, etc. However, you're saying you've found more traction in some areas than others, and I'm kind of curious, is that are you finding verticals that really lean into your why more, like they lean into that sustainability positioning more, or is it just that your technology is a better fit for what they do, like the hard nuts and bolts of the technology?
Sure. I think it's a twofold. I don't think you can answer that question in one way. I think our technologies provide. So let me take a step back. I think if you're looking at our target customers, they have a lot of sustainability goals themselves. We're selling into equipment manufacturers, we're selling into, indirectly with our buildings products, We're selling into, HVAC units and HVAC retrofits. And so there's a lot of government regulations that those companies need to hit with their ESG goals or with their electrification goals, net zero goals, however you want to say that. So I think they look to us because we are also driving the decarbonization, and that is our mission. But I also think the product itself helps drive their mission to get to their goals as well, and their revenue targets or energy savings targets that they need to hit from a governmental perspective or from a corporate initiative perspective as well.
There's something interesting in that because we've talked about this on the show before and kind of understood this in the larger manufacturing kind of marketplace that oftentimes the you know selling via enforcement of government regulation isn't necessarily the easiest way to get their attention. It's something they might have in the back of their minds, but it's not necessarily like the sexy thing that is driving them to use the product. Do you find that that they're kind of looking for your leadership in how they meet those goals, or are they kind of coming to you and saying, okay, we need to, meet this sustainability goal, and it looks like your product can help us do that?
Like, is the question, Jeff, kind of is meeting the goal, the government regulations, is that a nice to have as they're charging towards their ESG goals, or is that the main driver for their interest? Is that the question?
Yeah, thank you for clarifying what I said.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question because I think it all depends on the customer. I when you're talking to, I don't know, a very large scale industrial manufacturer slash OEM, they might have experience in electrification, they might not. So, and that goes with mid-size and startup companies as well that are actually producing the vehicles. And, yes, to a certain degree, sure, it helps as a conversation starter. Rebate programs with utilities across North America is something that helps our selling process greatly. They're getting rebates for using our products depending on the state that they're in the States. But if you're looking from a global perspective and you're looking at selling into, people that manufacture forklifts or high-speed rails or something of that nature, or even marine, you're looking at a different sales cycle. And I think the question is not necessarily about the government regulations. It's more so having a customer conversation and understanding what their experience is in electrification. And if they don't have any experience, that's where we can definitely support you because we do have the experience and the years of expertise. And I say that we're a startup, but we also have the years of expertise because we did acquire a number of different companies, and all of our internal engineers and salespeople come with a variety of industry expertise, leading to a more holistic conversation in terms of electrifying those vehicles. Now, if you are a company that has had electrification experience and you understand where you're trying to build, we can also help you on that front because we understand how to build into the engineering process and the manufacturing process around that, where we're not providing you with the basic education of how to even start electrifying your fleet, if that makes sense.
I wonder what you would say is your biggest challenge as a marketer in this kind of an organization.
To me, living and breathing this every day, it's very much like the crossroads between being product focused and being a missionary. And I think that is kind of where this conversation has gone as well, is like, how do you blend both? And I do think if you look at market research, if you look at, different industry reports, there's this competing kind of mindset between short-term revenue and sustainability targets. And so where do we intersect and make sure that you understand that your energy savings or your fleet electrification is going to get you that long-term revenue while also producing short-term revenue. But like the cost implications of producing electrification vehicles, electric vehicles in any possible way, like there needs to be a blend of the understanding and not just short-term revenue as being the only mindset that you have.
I can see a lot of connectivity here, Carmen. I'm thinking of kind of we have a lot of experience working with packaging manufacturers and others where obviously sustainability is a pretty important component. And it kind of plays into the last question that I had a bit because, in a lot of ways, driving, especially recyclable film and plastics and things like that, is actually it's taken government regulation to get organizations to be willing to spend the extra to get recyclability and to help them meet sustainability goals that they may not have had because their end customer wasn't necessarily asking for it. Um, do you find that the customers that you're working with are hearing the desire for electrification from their own customers as well, and are you leveraging those conversations?
Yeah, that's also a great question. It's very circular. You have the end user influencing the OEM or the manufacturer, who's then trying to find the right components or service providers to help get what the end user is asking for. So yes, I think it's a two-pronged approach. You need to be able to influence your customers who are ultimately going to buy from you, but you also need to influence those end users on a front where they're going to say, this is what we're wanting in the market, whether it's 1 year down the line, whether it's 10 years down the line. How do you influence those people to influence the buying decision that happens from the manufacturer?
Man, and you're having to do that plus investors plus your customers. It's a lot of tiers of within every ICP that you have. You're having to look at all the points on that circle.
The never ending onion.
One of the you're hooking on your word, you said missionary a bit, and I was just like, there's that really drives it home, like that level of how much education are you having to do in those very early awareness stages to even get to a point where you're into a sales conversation. And I think that's a dynamic that I think a lot of manufacturers have in certain components where maybe in certain areas of the business where they're innovating or what have you, and they're having to find a balance between how much time they spend educating people versus talking to the people that are already somewhat educated about this requirement. How have you thought about that balance?
Yeah, that's it's a really valid point in terms of the education piece. I think in all startups that I have been at, it's been education as a number one focus. I would say here it's more so that you need to showcase your expertise levels, because I do think from a manufacturing, this is also another piece on the manufacturing front. These large scale companies are very hesitant to work with new players on the block. They want somebody that provides, they don't want to take big risks, I should say. They want somebody that can provide reliability. That piece is a different messaging point than somebody that we're working with who might be in a startup mode themselves that has a vision of where they're going to. And then we play within that product's life cycle and how do we sell into that product's life cycle. So the education piece is different depending on the customer, right? So there is a good amount of education around our products that we need to do and why they might be better than others in the market. But then that's on a product level. If you go one step deeper, you're educating them on why they need electrification solutions to begin with, or you're educating them on rebate areas that they could take advantage of that could help them financially. And so, yes, it's all education, but I think it's a different type of education per ICP that you're looking at and how you nurture them along the way.
Yeah, it's interesting to imagine, as you said, like And then there's the second order of it, I think is how you said it, or it's, even the requirement for electrification or why it's even a thing. I could see a marketing decision where you're like, you know what, we're only going to talk to people who are already kind of know it's a thing. And now we're going to tell them why our product's better than their other options.
Yeah, I think there's a balance. Like, right, you have these customers that have been longstanding within the industry for a very long time. They know what they want, but it can require years of complex engineering solutions to potentially get there, and a lot of internal resources to get there. Whereas, you look at a mid-size or startup company that wants to do business with you, and they're more nimble and flexible and have the ability to, adapt a little bit quicker than maybe one of the big players. And so, it's finding the right balance of your customer base as well. That's not going to take all of your internal resources, but be able to get you short-term revenue plus the long-term projections.
Yeah, I mean, we're really speaking about the importance of finding the right person to sell to at the right time that has the right sales velocity based upon the stage of growth that our company's at.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you were at a certain size, if you were of a certain scale, maybe you could afford to educate people for 5 years before you get their money. But at a certain smaller size, well, you can't wait that long.
Exactly that, and it does take that kind of 50-50 blend of how many customers are we trying to win in this category versus how many customers are we trying to win in this category.
And that, that element of trust that's required to be built. Do you find that it's easier to achieve that with those smaller, more agile players? Or are they equally skeptical to the larger manufacturers?
Oh, that's a good question. I think, I think a lot of this comes down to personal relationships as well. I think that's something as marketers, I feel like we have put on the back burner in recent years, is the need for those personal relationships that you can take with you from company to company and the years of expertise that go along with that. And so while that's a big sales function, right? The business development piece, it all plays into the marketing, right? So how are we talking to those customers? Are we taking them through our engineering facilities? Are we giving them, the deep dive into our functions and the manufacturing process? But to your point, I don't think it's necessarily easier one way or another. I think it's more so that we all work with interpersonal skills, and it's a matter of how we're working with those relationship building functions throughout the entire sales process and the marketing process. So, do they like working with our team? Are we providing exceptional customer service? Like, those are the things that, when you get into a manufacturer, are we responding quickly to any engineering or technical issues that they have? I think it becomes more so about the customer service experience rather than the marketing at that point, to be totally honest.
One of the things you said there that I thought was interesting was that it almost sounded like, in the kind of sphere of electrification and how it exists more broadly, and you mentioned your background with Tesla and others, do you find that there's a lot of movement within the industry of people going, moving to new players and moving to new companies and kind of bringing those relationships with them and then kind of, I don't know, germinating new relationships as they move across the different organizations that are involved in this, because it is still a pretty new industry overall.
To your point, the electrification industry, I think the electrification terminology in clean energy is very much still a new industry. But I think some of the players that we're working with this is not a new industry. They've been in here for, 20 years, 100 years. They're legacy brands that we potentially are doing business with, versus maybe somebody that is starting up with several grants that they got at, potentially in California or in a different state. So I think, having been in financial services and done the whole marketing for wealth management, I think there's a lot of parallels between financial services and kind of the sales process when you look at different engineering, manufacturing brands. I do think that, if you develop a personal relationship with XYZ at one organization and you do move, then you have the potential of starting that relationship at a different organization. It's not this, um, you know, it's the networking interpersonal skills that I go back to on bringing the relationships, movement within the industries. As you mentioned, like I do think there is movement across engineering functions. And if I look at some of the previous companies I've worked with, when there's a new startup in town, they'll go head to that company because it's kind of the bright, shiny object. Or you look at who has the best engineering team and the testing, validation, engineering resources, product teams, and what that roadmap looks like, and then you get really bought into the culture of that organization and whether you want to be there or not. So in banking, people are switching, their banking roles every 3 to 5 years. They're, with a different bank, which is not surprising. They're in the same role, but just with a different company. And I think that tends to lend itself a little bit here as well.
It raises an interesting point of this background and kind of marketing of luxury brands and uh, or high net worth individuals that were being targeted, et cetera. What I'd be interested to know if there's something else that jumps out to you that really translates from that world into this world, or alternatively, something that absolutely doesn't. Both of those would be interesting to me.
Ooh, I need to think about that for a second. So I think there's a lot of parallels. I think the biggest piece I learned in my luxury marketing days was simple messaging that speaks to whoever is looking at the end content. So make it dummy proof, make it simple, give them exactly what they are needing, provide a really great experience. Whether that's a UX experience on your website, whether that's through your customer service teams or your sales teams, provide the highest level of service to your customer, no matter who that customer is. Now, on the other front, something that I would say doesn't resonate, it's a good question. I think there's actually more parallels than I want to admit, to be totally honest. And I'm trying to think of something that maybe doesn't bring itself from a luxury marketing perspective over to startups. I will say this. I think internal culture of a company is much different in a startup than it is with a luxury marketing brand. And the mindset that you have to be successful in a startup and in startup marketing specifically, you're not going to have this playbook that's been revised a couple times for you, but it's been really the playbook that a company has used for their lifetime. Especially if you're a legacy brand and you're just kind of going through the motions, and somebody else comes in and they're like, oh, I had this playbook to work from the previous person. Sure, I'll give a little bit of my flair to it, but I understand what my role and responsibilities are very clearly from a day-to-day perspective. I think what completely changes when you enter the landscape of marketing at a startup is that it's a roller coaster. You're going to experience a lot of highs. You're going to experience a lot of lows. You're going to experience wearing multiple hats, probably not in marketing, but across the organization. You're going to experience every type of marketing that you could possibly think of, every different area of expertise. You're going to jump 5 steps forward and probably fall 3 steps back. And you're going to do that again and again and again until you get it right. And even when you get it right, it's probably not right for 6 months from now. So I think the ability to be nimble and to you have to throw your ego out. There's no ego at startups, especially in startup marketing scenarios. You're not going to be the expert in the room all of the time. You need to test and learn from a variety of different strategies and be able to adapt at testing and learning. And I think that's the biggest piece that I have seen from legacy brands to startups is just, it tends to weed people out very quickly that can't handle that type of culture.
Yeah, when you're, I loved the picture that you painted about you finally get it right, and it's maybe only right for 6 months. It's not again.
Yeah, I applaud your ability to continue to roll with the punches and be adaptable to what's coming next.
And I applaud you for joining us on the show today. It's been wonderful to have your experience and expertise shared with our listeners. It's I've really enjoyed this conversation, Jillian. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I've really, really enjoyed it as well. You guys have great energy, and I appreciate being on here. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to The Kula Ring with Carmen Perry and Jeff White. Don't miss a single manufacturing marketing insight. Subscribe now at kulapartners.com/The Kula Ring. That's KULApartners.com/The Kula Ring.